Um, for this week's blog, I would like to answer the question about the way culture contributes to corruption in my country. I think the phrase that we have mentioned in the course really, the one, el que no tranza no avanza, really describes the Mexican culture regarding corruption. I mean, el que tranza no avanza, which means like you have to cheat to get ahead. I think the phrase has a lot of impact in the way people do business. They are always, well, most of the time, trying to do things in a way that they are benefited, but sometimes in a way that is detrimental for everybody else, as a way of making sure that we are always on top and that this position isn't threatened by others. The way we relate with authority is sometimes also defined by this particular phrase. In order to get something done, you have to cheat, pay bribes, extort, or in some ways benefit your friends or other resources. The teaching system, the medical sector, private business, and more act under the premise of always getting the greatest benefit with the minimum effort. If you can get a good grade without studying because you cheat or because you already have the answers, then you are perceived as a clever person who knows how to get things done. If you can get a medical prescription, for example, to justify some non-attendance or some lateness, then you are considered as a person who as a person that knows how to get out of difficulties or difficult situations without having to deal with the consequences, and that is supposedly something to admire. The main issue I see with this is that this conception is so deeply woven into the culture that we can even tell the difference between something that is corrupt or not. I am currently taking a class about citizenship and democracy, and when the teacher asked us about corruption, it was really hard to see as something bad. There was always a way to justify the acting corruptly, whether it was maintaining a scholarship or protecting our own private interests. Although it was just a small group of people who were asked these questions, I think the results can be taken as an indicative of how society behaves as a whole. There is always a way to justify wrongdoing, and the problem is that when everything can be justified, then what is the point of doing things how they are supposed to be done? Even when corruption is currently a very big part of the Mexican culture, I don't see it at all as an intrinsic characteristic of Mexicans. It is a result of a variety of circumstances, but it is definitely not something that should be accepted as an unchangeable part of our culture. The most important thing I learned this week was from Sung's article about fairer sex or fairer system. I really like that it, fals- it falsifies the hypothesis of women in power decreasing corruption, and I like how it proves that it's more related to progressive policies and the implementation of policies that arise from a country as a whole. I really like this topic because in the Mexican Congress it was recently discussed an initiative that ensures that 50% of all the candidates for Congress of all the candidacies for Congress are held by women in order to guarantee equality and reduce gender gap in jobs and health and other public issues. The arguments for this initiative are not related to corruption, but I think we can transfer the results of some article to this particular case to show that positions in power are not always the way to resolve political issues, but rather the implementation of progressive laws leads to a better representation of every sector in government. I am not saying I am against of women being equally nominated and being an equal participant of the public sector. I just think that we should be careful in not mixing causes and consequences that can lead to bigger conflict later in time. Uh, this is related to the most complicated thing I learned this week. The ideal reforms for corruption are not always easy to implement. What works for one country might not be what our other country needs, and implementing these policies without taking into consideration all aspects that define a country and what works better for them. Like this Mexican example, I mean, trying to implement something that has worked in other countries is not always um, what will work here. Just like corruption, it's hard to define. Reforms for corruption are just hard. They obey the same differences and can't be unified for every country and every situation.